Our guest today is Dr. Cliff Robertson Jr. Dr. Robertson holds degrees in biblical studies, divinity, theology, psychology, and counseling. He is also the founder and executive director of the Refuge, a nonprofit organization in West Columbia, Texas, that provides shelter, counseling, resources, and training to veterans in need. This is the second time he's been a guest on our podcast. His first appearance was in March of last year. We'll be talking about his work with veterans, his latest book, Your Life Matters, the Toolkit to Change Your World, and much, much more during this episode of Next Steps Forward. Cliff Robertson, welcome back to Next Steps Forward.
Man, it's an honor to be here again, Chris. Last time we talked a lot about veterans and PTSD, and just, I kind of hinted at this book that was coming out. So, man, I'm excited to be back with you.
You gave us the teaser, so we had to have you back.
Yes.
Appreciate that. Appreciate your time.
Yes, sir.
So as you mentioned, the last time you were on Next Steps Forward, you just started what you called a little project by the name of Your Life Matters. You're back, and that just happens to be the title of your latest book. I couldn't help but notice something about the subtitle, The Toolkit to Change Your World. It seems like all too often we get caught up in and are pushed into trying to change the world. Why is it important to you to make the more limited focus of your readers' individual worlds?
Well, a lot of times, especially today, we're pushed and pressed to conform to this or to that. And, we have all these inputs coming into our world, Chris, and we, everybody has something to say about who or what we are. And the truth is, none of those are necessarily accurate or helpful. And usually they're trying to manipulate us to buy something, to try something. And, the truth is, God made us with a mission and a purpose. And I think we need to be seeking that. We need to change our inputs. So what I'm really seeking is people to seek the opportunity to change their world, because if, Mother Teresa, and I love to quote from truly wise sources, said, you want to change the world, start by loving your family. Gandhi said, you want to change the world, sweep your own doorstep first, something like that. So I think it all begins with, changing how we view ourselves. One of the things that really hit hard right around the first of the year was a high profile suicide, Miss Christ there in New York. Miss America, lawyer, top of the world. You'd think she had everything, but she wrote in an essay that was published that said, I'm quickly approaching 30, and it's maddening that I feel like I have to do something to make my life matter before I turn 30. And I just, that statement caught my breath for a moment. It was just like, wow. Somebody who virtually had it all going for them, and to come to that end was just, that's disturbing. And I think we need to do something about it. And I hope this book is one of those things that helps.
Well, and it's very timely. When you and I spoke about a year ago, and throughout many of my shows, the one positive thing I've said about COVID is it's put a positive spotlight on mental health. And so it's bringing these issues, not hiding them at the kitchen table, but actually openly talking about them at the kitchen table, as we go back to work at the water cooler. And so I just appreciate you putting it out there and getting this book out there for everybody. So as I mentioned, your new book is titled Your Life Matters, the Toolkit to Change Your World. What was your motivation, your spark of inspiration for writing the book?
Well, a couple of different things, Chris. It really started with a conversation with my wife. She's a retired school teacher, and how a lot of her students would struggle with meaning and value, and how they saw themselves, and there were, and as we know, there's always tragically people doing things to themselves, hurting themselves, killing themselves in high school, junior high. And one of her goals was to ensure that each of them knew that they were loved, that they mattered, that they were important, that they were truly making a difference. So it started with that. And so I started jotting down some notes, and then I ran into some stories. Then during a counseling session, and of course I won't share any names here, I was talking with a dad who had been through some really tough times, and he was just telling me, I don't see any point to my life anymore. I don't even know why I'm still here. My kids don't like me. My wife is leaving me. The only thing he didn't say was that the dog had just bit him. Everything else had gone wrong. And so I just kind of, got a little brief, moment of inspiration with him. I said, okay, well, now let's just talk about this a minute. How many people do you interact with in your job a day? He's an insurance adjuster, not a firefighter, not a policeman, not a politician, not a high profile person at all. He was just kind of your average Joe. How many people do you interact with on a weekly basis? New. And he told me, I think it was about 30 people he would interact with on a weekly basis. You go to church and you go to the store, you do all these different things. Well, basically what we did is we did the math over the course of a year. And that came up to about, 15,000 people. No, I'm sorry, 1,500 people that he would interact with on a yearly basis in a positive, affirming way. Not just random passing on the street, but a positive, affirming way. And so we did the math, and over a 10-year period, you're filling up, you're filling up Staples Center, you're filling up, the Toyota Center worth of raving fans, people that you have impacted their life on a positive way. And when we were able to put that into context, and then look, okay, you've been doing this job for 20 years, so you're filling up football stadiums now. And again, when we put it in that context, he was able to see that his life mattered. I mean, he was that guy, like in the movie It's a Wonderful Life, that was standing on the bridge getting ready to jump, and his angel jumped in right before him. He was at that moment in life, and being able to kind of step back and see things from a different perspective for a moment changed everything for him. Now he's back in a positive relationship with his kids, and him and his wife still aren't going to make it, but that is what it is. But those kids are priceless treasures and a gift. And so I think about that. I think about how many more people are going through that very same thing every day, and that's the inspiration.
You said that the book has a very simple premise, and I'm going to really focus on these three words for most of our conversation: your life matters. But something I like about it is that it has a lot of different stories, ranging from, you mentioned a moment ago, Mother Teresa and Gandhi, Helen Keller, to people you personally know, but our readers probably don't, such as people who've experienced post-traumatic stress or disability. Besides insurance salesmen, would you share one or two of those stories from the book? And what was it about each of those stories that prompted you to choose them?
Yeah, one of the stories that I'll share, well, two. I love the story of Annie. Annie is pretty special. In fact, it was also one of the underlying motivations for how the book ended up being structured, with all the stories of different lives that mattered. Annie was a young girl, about 10 or 11 years old, but she was diagnosed as being clinically insane. Her nickname was Crazy Annie, and put into a dungeon at a mental health hospital, in a mental hospital. When she wasn't screaming and banging her head against the wall, she was in a catatonic state, completely unmanageable. There was nothing anybody thought they could do for her. But then there was this elderly nurse who was at the end of her career, who was a woman of faith and just wanted to see what she could do, because she believed that all of God's children just needed to know they were loved. So during her lunch hour, she would trek down to the dungeons, what they called it, and she would eat lunch, and she would talk with Annie, and she would sometimes sing. And then one week she had part of her dessert left, so she left part of that brownie on the food tray to to Annie's cell. And Annie didn't respond, nothing like that. So she didn't know. So she left, went back to work. The next day she came down and realized that the little dessert was gone. So she kept doing this over the course of several weeks. And in a couple of weeks, Annie started talking to her. And after a month or so, the doctor started to notice a difference. After a year of this, Annie was then moved to the normal floor and is seen as such dramatic improvement that she could be, returned to normal mental health type hospital work. And when she became of age to be released and was deemed to be healthy and okay to be released, she made the decision not to go because she wanted to turn around and do for somebody else what this elderly, now retired nurse had done for her. Her name is Annie Sullivan, and the person she turned around and did what she did for was, obviously, as we know the rest of the story, Helen Keller. But think about that for just a moment, Chris. Just that one simple act of kindness, just coming down and interacting and sharing just a little bit. It didn't cost her anything but a few trips up and down some stairs and a little bit of food. But it changed the world. It changed her world, which turned around and impacted so many other people. There's another story that I can only share part of it because it's very involved, and it was it's a story I share about PTSD. Young man was serving in the Army. He was a driver, in Iraq, and going out on missions. It was hot, tough work. You never knew what was going to happen. But one day when they were out on patrols, the mine sensing vehicle around them and in front of them sensed something was up. They stopped. And that was really pretty much the last thing he remembers in that moment, because the IED, the improvised explosive device, was remotely detonated, manually, remotely detonated, and it basically turned that mine sensing vehicle into, raining metal in front of them, and it turned this young soldier's vehicle upside down. It was a horrific explosion. Shots started ringing out. It was horrible. And this guy was was injured a little bit, but the thing that happened was one of this young man's best friends was in that vehicle that basically disintegrated. And there's a survivor's remorse, and there's the you never knowing what's coming next. When he got home, because he went on leave, went to the hospital, went on leave. He was going through the airport, and he sees somebody that looks like he was from the Middle East opening up and getting his cell phone out, and that triggered his PTSD response. And he basically had a just kind of a personal meltdown. Went home, trouble getting out of bed, trouble doing anything. But then his family and his father intervened and started talking to him, and finally got him to open up and talk about it. And it was that kind of intimacy, and then beyond that, continuing to seek help, that turned that young man's life from being a statistic, because he knew that the way he was inside, he couldn't remain. But his family reminded him how much he mattered to them. And so he got the help he needed. He saw that he was valuable, got the help that he needed, and now has a happy family of his own, and is able to turn around and give back to others. These are just some of the stories. There's quite a few in there. Some are not happy, because that's just life. Sometimes life doesn't go well, but it doesn't diminish our value, though.
And how do all those different stories, the ones you shared, as well as the other stories in the book, how they connect into a common thread?
The way they connect to a common thread is that we're all going through something in life. A lot of times we see on social media today how, we see people in with perfect pictures on perfect vacations in front of brand new homes, and everything seems perfect. But if you were to pull away the veil and pull back the camera, you would see that the couple were just fighting, or that they just went into so much debt to get the new vehicle or do this or do that. When they step away from the camera and everything else, they're struggling with depression, or they're struggling with tragedy and loss. We all have something we're going through. And a lot of times that something we're going through makes us feel like we don't matter. Like no matter what we do, we don't matter. Our best efforts always fall short, always fall short. And the truth is, we are making a bigger difference every day than we can imagine. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but that's the crux of it.
And it's a perfect segue. My next question, what leads people to believe the world would be better off without them? You're focusing on your life matters, and you just mentioned, people think it doesn't matter. How do you get to that point?
Wow, that's a good question. I will talk a little bit about my own story here, because I've been there, and there's a lot of things that lead you to that point. I was there at really two different places in my life. The first one was when I lost my wife and little girl in a car accident. It's been about 21 years ago now. But I will tell you that there were points during that time, and after that, where that's how I felt. I mean, the woman who had never gotten a speeding ticket, never been in a car accident, never had anything like that happen. And I'd been getting speeding tickets since I was old enough to drive. Had been in, a few accidents, nothing ever major, but still. And one morning on the way to take our little girl to the doctor, 2-lane road, drops off the shoulder on one side, and in an attempt to overcorrects and corrects into incoming traffic. We lost her that day after she was life flighted to the hospital, and my little girl who was in the car, we lost her later that same week. And you just get to a point to where you feel hopeless and you feel helpless. In fact, I remember getting to a point to where it felt like everything was literally, closing in on me. And while it was, I remember the day it was raining outside, but on the inside it was raining even more. And, it overtakes you, and it makes you feel that way. It really does. And, and it was just one of those moments where you really felt like the world would be better off. You would be better off without you in this world.
And in your work with people who have suicidal thoughts, is there a tipping point? You mentioned yours. Do you see where people either move beyond the self-destructive thoughts or go forward with an attempt to kill themselves? And are there warning signs we should look for, whether in ourselves or others, to tell us when it's time to seek help?
Well, I'm gonna, start with the last part of that question first. I think most of us at some point in our lives should have what I refer to as a paid friend. In other words, a counselor, somebody to talk to, because too often in this world, we are too busy, too caught up in trying to maintain a certain image. And we lose track of the fact that, if we can't deal with these things, one day they will deal with us. I mean, as men, especially, we are really good at compartmentalizing. We can put that issue in the box, and we'll deal with it when we have to deal with it. But the problem is that box grows and creates a life of its own, and it becomes its own pandemic, and in our own mental health. So having somebody where we can unload to on a regular basis is a good idea. How they get to the tipping point, everybody is different. at the Warriors Refuge, we deal with veterans who are considering suicide every week. I mean, it's that's why we are so hyper diligent. Everybody's in counseling. And if there's ever been a chemical dependency issue in your life, you're in chemical dependency counseling too. Okay. It doesn't matter. You're going to be receiving counseling. And if there's a history of mental health issues, you're being physically checked on every day. And it's in those checks that we run across the person who has the pill bottle out in front of him, that he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have it, and that opens the door for questions. That opens the door for those kind of conversations. And it's, my life is over. I can't do this anymore. For a veteran, a lot of times it's that they can't live with the images, the nightmares, the PTSD, the recurring, the way that it, things that it leads them to do to try to numb it out, the drugs, the alcohol, because those are oftentimes co-occurring. For an individual, it's different. Sometimes it's tragedy that brings us to it. Sometimes it is financial loss. Sometimes it's loss of a relationship. Sometimes it's just being overwhelmed by this world that seems to constantly pull at us from all these different directions. And we just get to a point of hopelessness. It's different for everybody. But some of the signs, you asked about that. Some of the signs, some of the typical signs are when somebody who's normally talkative begins to withdraw. When they withdraw and we notice it, we really need to step in. And I don't mean that we step in an intervention way where we're surrounding them with a bunch of people and all that. No, we just talk to them. And we don't necessarily have to talk to them about why they're not talking. We just talk to them and it will come out. If we'll just talk to them, maybe we approach them with, hey, listen, I'm having this problem and I wanted to talk to you. Because what we do in that moment is we help them take their mind off of themselves and put it on another problem, which can alleviate them. But the other thing that it does is it now opens the door to let them know it's okay to talk about their problem. And, just talk to them. And, then there's the classic signs of when somebody's given away everything and all that. So, I mean, those are two very basic. The main thing is pay attention, because there are signs. Just pay attention.
May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so it's very timely to have you on the show today, as well as the launch of your books. Really appreciate your time on this. The book is divided into two sections. The first section is story heavy. The second is heavy with practical information, such as improving our inputs. Can you drill down on some of that practical information about what we can do to improve our world and our mental well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite topics in mental health is the area of psychology called positive psychology. I absolutely love it. I remember going through the coursework and learning about this for the first time. A lot of people don't know what positive psychology is. They hear that term and they're like, what is that? Originally, psychology, psychiatry was developed to help people who were truly miserable become less miserable. That was their thought process, and they got relatively good at that. Positive psychology is meant to take people who have improved, who are just kind of slightly miserable, and get them to a point of happiness. Find that way to truly improve their level of well-being. And there are some things that each of us can do on a daily basis that has been studied and is important that we're doing. In the book, I talk about those, and I talk about the research associated with it as well. But some of it's really simple, like well, let me kind of give you a little bit of a little bit more background. They did a study. I'm kind of a study research reading geek. So they did a study, and they studied somebody who had just won the lottery versus someone who had just become a paraplegic. Okay. And in those first weeks after both of those events, one of their happiness levels is through the roof, and one of them is way down, obviously. And it's not hard to guess which. But here's my question for you, Chris. Where is their happiness level a year later? Absolutely the same. Absolutely the same, because our mental and physical being seeks to find that status quo, seeks to come back to that baseline level of where we were before. So what the positive psychologists went and studied and researched, what are some ways that we can begin to improve that, move that needle up where it's consistently up. And I'll give you just a quick rundown. The first one obviously is exercise. Exercise is known to, the endorphins and get everything going. Something else that's really important is a time of daily meditation on something sacred, and everybody's definition of that is different. Mine is the Bible. I go through some devotionals in the morning, and when I don't do it, it's kind of like my day is not complete. But that's said to elevate your level of happiness. Something else that they say is a gratitude journal on a daily basis, writing down just a few things on a daily basis that you are truly grateful for, whether it be that day, that month, that year, whatever it is. And then one of the last things that they talk about is doing something for somebody else who cannot return the favor. Doing something, giving of yourself, physically making a difference. They say that is like taking somebody that's making $25,000 a year and giving them a pay raise to $75,000 a year. It's that kind of mental elevation. But doing these things on a regular basis has been shown to consistently elevate our personal sense of well-being dramatically. And I couldn't recommend them any more highly. Now, they're not the entire solution, but it certainly is something that each person can do on a regular basis.
And you touched on journaling there. The number of articles I've read the last several months focused on journaling for your mental health, it's probably the most I've seen in any one topic. So I love that.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. It helps you to unload, unpack your world.
It's just you and your pen.
Yep.
We've been talking to Dr. Cliff Robertson Jr., and we'll be right back after a short break. So Cliff, we covered a lot of real estate in the first half of the show.
Yeah, we did.
And you and I swapped a couple of emails and phone calls about things we wanted to talk about. I want to go back to one of the guests I had on the show last summer, one of my all-time favorite shows, because he was eating his lunch during the podcast, which was very interesting. So I was former San Francisco 49er, and as my listeners know, I'm a diehard Cowboys fan. You're a Texas boy, Dallas Cowboy Charles Haley. He's in the Hall of Fame, but he's also struggled with mental health issues throughout his life. Here's the next steps forward, as I mentioned last summer, and said that in his darkest moments, he could think of 99 reasons to kill himself. But you always have to find that one reason not to. You shared with us, the very dark place you were in before in your life. What took you there? What was the one reason that you found that you didn't want to go forward?
Well, when I lost my wife and little girl, one of the things I didn't mention in the last segment was I have a son. At that moment, he was 9, getting ready to be 10 years old. And what pulled, one of the things that pulled me back from the edge, and I got to that edge a couple of times, not just once. It wasn't just one and done. That's the thing about mental health, is that, and this is what I really want people to hear, is that there's no quick fix to any of this. It requires a disciplined effort, and we have to stay with it. We have to keep these things in mind. So, but what kept coming back to me once I got past that crisis moment that I mentioned earlier, where I felt like everything was closing in on me. What Beyond that, what kept coming back to me was, what would it do to him? What would it do to him? How would it impact his life? What would it cause him to do? And I couldn't imagine, especially a young boy who had just lost his mom, just lost his sister, his younger sister. And that was my one thing in that, in those moments. 'Cause like I said, there was more than one. And if we're being open here, and if you were to pick up the book Transformed, the story isn't pretty. There's that loss of my wife and little girl cascaded into a lot of other things. And one of the things that I'm only recently coming to grips with is that I suffered some PTSD from from my time in the in the Navy. I was an air traffic controller, and I almost had an F-14 drive into the back of the ship. The pilot got vertigo, and it got really scary. Like fully loaded, with bombs and everything that they carry when they're on mission and all that, and missed the back in the ship by like 4 feet. And at 170 miles an hour, that's not much. But you put all that together, and it led me down a really dark path, and I got to a point where I literally lost everything, and it was that point that those thoughts of being worth more dead than alive, and all that came back to my mind, and I will tell you that in that moment, it came back to faith. Crying out to God in that moment. And that's what really began to pull me back. That was my dark, rock bottom, flat on my back again, having lost everything. It wasn't pretty.
So you mentioned your book Transformed, which is your personal story. That was your first book. And when I have authors on the show, I ask them, is it a labor of love or is it a real labor? But since you've just published your second book, it's a labor of love. But you just talked about faith. You write in both books about your faith, but in Transform, you described how your faith was put to the ultimate test. How does one maintain their faith in a higher being when everything's going so wrong, the world's going to shit around them?
I would love to tell you that it's easy, but it's not. Anybody that tells you that they don't have questions, they don't have doubts, is probably not telling you the truth. But I guess what you do is you remember how God has brought you through those hard times. One of the things that I do in my morning time is I'm journaling, and in that, those journals oftentimes are prayers where I'm writing, I'm writing to God about what's going on and the challenges that we face and all that, because you mentioned about the nonprofit, the Warriors Refuge, and and I know that you run a nonprofit as well, but we're on the front lines. I mean, we're dealing with real issues, people wanting to hurt themselves, or people who have lost everything. Some of the people that come to see us are in a bad place, and times can be tough, or maybe there's financial concerns. Maybe there's been a delay in this grant or that grant, or we didn't get this grant, or whatever it is. There's a financial concern, and the questions go on and on, and sometimes it's not easy. But one of the things that I continue to reflect back on is a couple of passages. One is, and this is kind of my transformed passage, in Isaiah 61 verses 1-3. There's this part in there, and a lot of us know the passage that talks about, and he will give you beauty for ashes. Well, most people think that's a really cute verse. Oh, you have a few ashes and he's going to give you something beautiful. No, what it means is if all you have left are ashes, it must have been one hell of a fire. And what he's saying is, I will take whatever is left and I will bring something absolutely wonderful from it. And I continue to rely on that and call upon that promise. And I have yet to see it not come to pass. It may not come to pass in my timing, because I can be really impatient, but it does come. And just continuing to rely on those promises, and they do come to pass.
So let's talk about your day job if we can.
Okay.
Well, you just touched on there for a moment. What motivated you to start the Warriors Refuge? And as you were putting your own life back together, did you have any trouble convincing people that you could build and lead a credible organization?
Well, I will tell you that the shelter was kind of a dream of mine. When the part of my story I didn't share was that, when I lost everything, there was a point where I spent 120 days in a veterans homeless shelter, and it became a launching pad for me. It allowed me to get back on my feet, not having to worry about how I was going to pay the bills, and really get my life together. And it did exactly that. And that was the model for what I wanted to be able to do in the future. But one of the toughest things in the world is allowing a municipality to allow you to build a shelter in their city. It is one of the toughest things to get through that you would imagine. But then one day I was invited to a disabled American veterans Christmas party. My dad invited me, and I really didn't want to go. I'll be honest, because a lot of times, I'm 56, and I would say I was probably 50, 51 at the time. And about 51. And my wife talked me into going. She said, your dad's invited you, you need to go. And we just happened to sit next to a guy who owned a former nursing home that wanted to do something for veterans. He was older, he was in his mid 80s, didn't have the energy, didn't have the capacity to do it. And so we talked, and before I knew it, we had been gifted a $1 million building to get started. Now, we didn't have any money. We didn't have any money at all. I was working as a pastor in a church plant, in a church that had just started. So there was no money, there was no deep pockets to fund this. And you're right, going around to people and saying, hey, this is what we're doing, we could really use your support. It rang on a lot of deaf ears. But I have to tell you, when we finally had our big fundraiser, we had a pretty good turnout. We had several hundred people show up, and we did okay, even though we didn't have a clue what we were doing. And then I will tell you, the miracle of all miracles happened. I get a call on December 31st, and there's a local foundation there in West Columbia that I didn't even know existed. Called me and said, we have a check for you. And I'm thinking, great, $300, $400, $500 or so. And no, it was, $250,000. And all of a sudden, all the worries, all the challenges went away. We were able to hire a grant writer that helped us after that be able to get the VA and the Department of Labor grants and the Department of Health and Human Services grants, and made us, where we are. I mean, I look at it at every level that this, that the whole process has been a miracle. But absolutely, everybody does look at you like you want to do what, and you have how much experience doing that. It's a miracle. It really is.
And once you get that grant, you're like the dog that caught the car, like, oh crap, what do I do now? But off you go, and here you are running phenomenal shelter.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the people that the Warriors Refuge serves. Are there common denominators among homeless veterans?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Are there common denominators among homeless veterans?
Yeah, there are. Really, we're working with two different types of veterans, two different basic groups. One is, Vietnam era, late Vietnam, era veterans, and then we're, Desert Storm, Operation Enduring Freedom, Afghanistan, Iraq veterans. Those are the two basic groups we're dealing with, and both of them have challenges. I would say the greatest common denominator between the two of them is, it may sound like a fallback, but it is oftentimes undiagnosed PTSD and mental health challenges. It's not always PTSD. Sometimes it's depression. Sometimes it's something greater than that. But the challenge with that is, especially as it goes undiagnosed, is it leads to other things where they try to fix it themselves, and that usually comes back into drugs or alcohol. So they end up taking one to help solve the other, and it makes it all worse. In fact, statistically, they say that 70% of those who suffer with PTSD do not know that there are answers to it, and they don't know that they have it, but they do. And it's so I would say those are probably the largest common denominator. One of the things that happens that some people don't realize is that you say the military training is great, and it gives you all these skill sets, and really it does. But one of the challenges is, say that you're that you're infantry, and I'm so grateful for those guys and what they do. But the problem is, let's say you're suffering from PTSD based on the things you experienced carrying that rifle or whatever it is you were doing on the front lines. You come back, your skill set has trained you to do what? Carry a gun and put yourself in dangerous situations, not compatible with what's going on between your ears. So what does that leave you with? Well, that leaves you unable to effectively earn an income with this current skill sets you have. And so that's something that, I haven't seen truly effectively addressed in the way that the military exits people out, because I'm not really sure how you would do that, to be honest. There's lots of good education programs, but not everybody is meant to be in college, and they don't necessarily promote the vocational stuff. That's why at the Refuge, one of the things we do is we have vocational training. We have heavy equipment that we train veterans to operate on. In fact, we have 3 pieces of heavy equipment that are out on a job site that our veterans are operating while they're learning how to operate it and get certified in it. And the cool thing is, Chris, that the reason we chose that area is, one, there's always a need for people to do that. And secondly, our disabled veterans can operate that equipment.
Last year, we talked about the different definitions and different degrees of homelessness and near homelessness. Those differences may come as a surprise to some people. Can you walk us through those differences and why those distinctions are important?
Well, there are, really there's 2 areas that I focus on. There's, and you're right, there are different degrees. There's at risk of being homeless. There's homeless, and then there's episodic homelessness. In other words, it just continues. But the 2 that we really focus on are the really I guess we spend time with all 3, but the ones that I talk about the most are just being homeless and at risk. Homeless can mean that you're couch surfing. You're staying on a friend's couch. You do not have a permanent residence. And homelessness can mean you're living in your car or your truck. And so there's that. Being at risk of being homeless is a definition that is subject to lots of questions. And different people look at it different ways. The way that I look at it is this: is that if somebody were to lose their job and struggle for the next 90 days, they to me are at risk of being homeless. because in 90 days, they may very well no longer be able to pay their bills and be on the street. Sometimes it's less than that. And if there's not an effective family structure around them, which a lot of times there's not, they become at risk. So one of the, one of the scary numbers in the veteran community is, while there's between, depending upon whose numbers you look at, there's between 40 and 100,000 homeless vets at any one time in America. There's approximately 1.5 million veterans that are at risk of becoming homeless in America. And that's a scary number. And a lot of times that at-risk number has to do with undiagnosed mental health issues, training, vocational skills, with the cost of everything going up, with not necessarily pay going up. There's, what's going to happen there, and that ends up being a trigger as well. So there's there are some challenges there. The third type is the episodic, and those are those that they get better for a little while, they get out on their own, and they fall back into something like drugs or alcohol, or can't manage their own mental health. They have to go back to the hospital, and they become homeless again. And we see that, I would say, out of, we've got, as many as 65 veterans at our facility there in West Columbia. I would say about a third are probably episodic homeless.
The last time we spoke, you said nobody sees the difference that their kind words make. That takes us back to what you were talking about earlier in this conversation, when we're talking about the impact we make each day without even realizing it. Do you have a trick or routine that you follow to consistently remind yourself about the difference that your kind words can make? And how can the rest of us do a better job in that area?
Well, I'll tell you that one of the best parts of my world is my wife reminding me, hey, you need to make sure you tell that person thank you. And she's a big help there. Really, I guess the key is approaching it intentionally. Just an intentionality of trying to every day. And this is one thing, getting back to journaling, is that, make it one of the things that you write about in a gratitude portion of a journal. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to say some encouraging words to the bank teller, the person at the drive-through, the person at the restaurant. One of the things that I wrote about, because I read a lot too, but and one of the guys that I've read a lot of recently is, Robin Sharma, great guy. And one of the things that he does is he'll go to a restaurant, and he'll get a bottle of wine, he'll drink one glass and give the rest of the bottle to the kitchen staff. While I don't necessarily drink, one of the things I do try to do is the person that's coming by to clean up tables, I will make sure to hand them a tip themselves, in addition to the person that's waiting on us, just to try to, again, reach out and make a difference. Just being intentional. That's the main thing, and kind of holding yourself accountable through that journaling can do a lot.
And how does someone get in touch with you if they want to help out your cause or invite you to speak to their group?
Well, there's a lot of different ways they can do that. My email address is Dr. Cliff at thewarriorsrefuge.us. That's probably the easiest way to get there. You can also call the Warriors Refuge at 979-345-3800 and ask for me, and the number will be patched to me wherever I am, whether I'm in the building or I'm somewhere else.
And more importantly, where can they find your books?
Well, they can find my books on Amazon. Whether it's Transformed or Your Life Matters, you can go there, or I've got a website, yourlifematterstoday.com, and you can find them both on there as well. You'll also find my blog there too. So I do some other writing along with it. So yeah, you can go to those two places, Amazon or yourlifematterstoday.com.
Dr. Cliff Robertson Jr., author of Transformed and Your Life Matters, the toolkit to change your world. Thanks so much for being us today.
It was an honor, Chris, truly an honor.
No, honor was mine. And as always, thank you to the greatest audience in the world for tuning in to Next Steps Forward. I'm Chris Meek. For more details about upcoming shows and guests, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Chris Meek, public figure, and on Twitter at @ChrisMeek_USA. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with another leader from the world of business, politics, public policy, sports, or entertainment. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.